Hello again. Welcome to episode 5 of our 5-part deep study of the Bhagavad Gita, the Song of the Lord, India's most beloved wisdom scripture, here in the Eknath translation, 2007, second edition, Nilgiri Press. I know you have your copy already. It is an essential must-have book for anybody who's watching these videos and interested in this kind of stuff. So we've been going through it very carefully now. This is our 5th video and last video. And we're going to look at the last 3 chapters, chapters 16, 17, and 18. And the form hasn't varied. You know, it's basically a conversation between these two characters, Arjuna, who it represents all of us, an ordinary guy with a job to do, and Krishna, who is the spiritual teacher, but also, you know, God. He is the avatar or incarnation of Lord Vishnu, but as he had made very clear in some previous chapters, Vishnu is just one of his many forms, and he's really identical to the source out of which even Vishnu comes. So this is Brahmanatman, this is the self, this is the Atman, the formless, sacred source out of which all forms come and to which forms return, standing before us in human form as Krishna and teaching us the Sanatana Dharma, you know, the timeless truth, the timeless wisdom. And that's what we've been working through for these previous videos. So let's pull it all together here in chapters 16, 17, and 18. 16, kind of like the one we were looking at last time. One of the chapters we looked at last time is one of the most dualistic chapters. You know, that's what makes this really literature and not systematic philosophy, because there are contrasts, and some might say contradictions, between moments in the Gita where Krishna seems to say this here and then something quite distinct from that over here. And you never know how these texts were all put together and what influences happened through the centuries and transcriptions and so on. We see this with a lot of ancient texts, and just like some of the letters of Paul are not by Paul, they don't sound like Paul at all. The philosophy is practically the opposite of what he said in this other letter that we think he did actually write. So I'm not arguing that's the case with the Gita, but it feels like that when you go to a chapter like chapter 16, 2 paths. And it talks about basically kind of an angelic path and a demonic path. Some people have divine tendencies, Krishna says, others demonic. I have described the divine at length, Arjuna. Now listen while I describe the demonic. Some people say that the word ignorant would be just as good here as demonic. Demonic's a little dramatic, you know, demons. But if that works for you, that's cool. How about just like super extremely ignorant, unconscious people who end up doing horrible things? Verse 7, the demonic do things they should avoid and avoid the things they should do. I've had days like that. They have no sense of uprightness, purity, or truth. Quote, there is no God, they say, end quote. No truth, no spiritual law, no moral order. The basis of life is sex. What else can it be? End quote. Holding such distorted views, possessing scant discrimination, they become enemies of the world, causing suffering and destruction. A little bit of an explanation, I suppose, on where evil comes from. If everything is Brahmanatman, then why is there Charles Manson, right? Adolf Hitler, Jeffrey Dahmer, insert your favorite demonic figure here. How can that be? Because those guys are all Atman too. Well, this is how it can be. Hypocritical, proud, and arrogant, living in delusion and clinging to deluded ideas, insatiable in their desires, they pursue their unclean ends. Although burdened with fears that end only with death, they still maintain with complete assurance, and quote, gratification of lust is the highest that life can offer, end quote. So Krishna's trying to teach Arjuna, don't be like that. This is how not to do it, yeah? So bound on all sides by scheming and anxiety. Sounds pretty much like the Godfather movies. Driven by anger and greed, they amass by any means they can a hoard of money for the satisfaction of their cravings. I got this today, they say. Tomorrow I shall get that. This wealth is mine, and that will be mine too. I have destroyed my enemies. I shall destroy others too. Am I not like God? I enjoy what I want. I am successful. I am powerful. I am happy. I am rich and well born. Who is equal to me? I will perform sacrifices and give gifts and rejoice in my own generosity. End quote. This is how they go on, deluded by ignorance, bound by their greed, and entangled in a web of delusion, whirled about by a fragmented mind. They fall into a dark hell. It just goes on. It's a grim picture, right? And here's the reincarnation piece, and then we'll move on to chapter 17. Krishna says, life after life, I cast those who are malicious, hateful, cruel, and degraded into the wombs of those with similar demonic natures. Ouch. You just said what about my mom? Birth after birth, they find themselves with demonic tendencies. Degraded in this way, Arjuna, they fail to reach me and fall lower still. This is the dark moment of the Bhagavad Gita. Just a grim kind of lifting the lid and looking into hell and see who's there and how they got there. And I know this heaven and hell language is sort of confusing, but this is part of the religious, mythical ideology of Hinduism. You know, it's not all just jnana yoga philosophy. It's not all Shankara, you know, who goes beyond all this sort of God and goddess and heaven and hell talk and puts it all more on a kind of cerebral plane. Right here, we're just, we're talking with regular people about good and evil, and in terms that they understand, that they have heard before. And so Krishna is doing what any great teacher does. He starts where students are and goes from there. Going now to chapter 17, it's called the power of faith. Now, faith is an interesting word here. Faith does not, in this case, mean believing in things for which there is no evidence. Faith is a kind of supra-rational or trans-rational knowing. Knowing beyond the conceptual mind. So, again, keep in mind the three gunas. Sattva as clarity and illumination. Rajas as kind of manic, unfocused energy. And tamas as sloth, darkness, and inertia and ignorance. So Krishna says those who are sattvic, turning the gunas into an adjective now, sattvic, rajasic, tamasic, yeah? Those who are sattvic worship the forms of God. Those who are rajasic worship power and wealth. Those who are tamasic worship spirits and ghosts. Very simple, but very powerful. Some invent harsh penances, motivated by hypocrisy and egotism. They torture their innocent bodies. And me, who dwells within, blinded by their strength and passion, they act and think like demons. Look, I think he's throwing the ascetics under the bus here. Those guys that go out in the forest and pierce their tongues with weights and fast for weeks on end until they're just skin and bones and sleep naked in the freezing cold or walk on coals or stab themselves with stuff. All that extreme self-mortification. He's like, hey, hello, I'm living in your body. You're hurting me too. Remember how Atman enjoyed our pleasures in a previous chapter? Atman feels our pain to some extent. So he's basically saying, that's a kind of rajasic or tamasic form of worship. All that whipping yourself, because you sinned once or something. Here's another clue in verse 8. Sattvic people enjoy food that is mild, tasty, substantial, agreeable, and nourishing. Food that promotes health, strength, cheerfulness, and longevity. Rajasic people like food that is salty or bitter, hot, sour, or spicy. Food that promotes pain, discomfort, and disease. Tamasic people like overcooked, stale, leftover, and impure food. Food that has lost its taste and nutritional value. Man, we are really getting into the details here, aren't we? But he's doing what teachers do. He's looking for like real life examples to help Arjuna understand the difference between a sattvic life, a rajasic life, and a tamasic life. And it can even show itself in terms of cuisine. Verse 11, the sattvic perform sacrifices with their entire mind fixed on the purpose of the sacrifice. Without thought of reward, they follow the teachings of the scriptures. The rajasic perform sacrifices for the sake of show and the good it will bring them. There's a lot of ego in rajasic action. The tamasic perform sacrifices ignoring both the letter and the spirit of the law. They omit the proper prayers, the proper offerings, the proper food, and the proper faith. So, a rather insulting portrait of the tamasic person, the tamasic life, the way they eat, the way they worship, and so on. Much more of that, by the way, in chapter 18. So we'll, let's see. Let's talk about giving, charitable giving. Giving simply because it is right to give, without thought of return, at a proper time and proper circumstances, and to a worthy person, is sattvic giving. Giving with regrets or in the expectation of receiving some favor or of getting something in return is rajasic. Giving at an inappropriate time and in inappropriate circumstances and to an unworthy person without affection or respect is tamasic. We're really getting at the intention of action. In all three of those cases, gift was given. But in what sense are you giving it? For what purpose? Again, without attachment to the results or with the expectation of the phala, of the fruits of action. I'm putting money in the basket at church so God will, do something for me. That's the middle one. That's rajasic giving, yeah? All right. I appreciate you sticking with me through all this. I know when I make these series of videos, sometimes viewership falls off toward the last video. We'll see how this one goes when I upload it to YouTube. But we are at chapter 18 now. Let's spend a few minutes here because really, just as Gandhi said, chapter 2 was kind of the whole Gita in condensed form. I think so too. Chapter 18 is like, all right, let's sum everything up. Let's kind of go back over some of the stuff. So it's one of the longest chapters, might be the longest chapter. But they're coming to an end of their discussion, and much has been revealed, much has been taught, and much has been learned. So in a way, we don't really need any more information, but he gets into some really beautiful detail here about the gunas again, about sattvic behavior, rajasic behavior, and tamasic behavior. He says to renounce, this is Krishna, to renounce one's responsibilities is not fitting. To run away from what you're supposed to do, your duty, is not fitting. The wise call such deluded renunciation tamasic. To avoid action from fear or difficulty or physical discomfort is rajasic. There is no reward in such renunciation, in such walking away, such abandonment. But to fulfill your responsibilities, knowing that they are obligatory, while at the same time desiring nothing for yourself, this is sattvic renunciation. Those endowed with sattva clearly understand the meaning of renunciation and do not waver. They are not intimidated by unpleasant work, nor do they seek a job because it is pleasant. Now, before we go into more of those kinds of detailed examples, this is just an open question. There's a sense in which, because of the reincarnation model of Hinduism, we are born with a certain temperament where one of those three gunas is predominant. And this gets a little creepy for us to say, think about all the people you know. Are some of them just by temperament, just by nature, more tamasic? And while others are more rajasic and others are more sattvic? Ooh, that sounds kind of judgy, But We want to stop short of an absolute determinism, like you are genetically determined to be tamasic and you're going to be crude and ignorant your whole life. I don't think that's the full picture, because we have to, like in all religious philosophies, maintain the notion of free will. The Atman is still the ultimate reality within all of us. So there is always the possibility of spiritual evolution, even within one lifetime. Or else what's the point of all this wisdom teaching, right? If everyone's just born stamped from birth by fate as having that temperament, and just wait till you get, that's absurd, right? That logically defies the whole project of Hinduism, which is for us all to somehow, through various self-discipline and widely varied means, become increasingly more self-aware, capital S, self-aware. So I don't think we should see the gunas as genetic determinism. We should see the gunas as tendencies and temperaments. And no matter who you are and who your parents were and what genetic temperaments you have, there is room for improvement. It's like that great saying in Zen Buddhism: you're perfect just the way you are, but you could use a little improvement. So let's look at just a few more examples here on this whole Sattvic thing. Let's talk about knowledge. What kind of knowledge there is. And as a philosophy guy, this is of keen interest to me. Epistemology. What is knowledge? How do we distinguish facts from opinions and all of that? Sattvic knowledge, Krishna says, sees the one indestructible being in all beings. The unity underlying the multiplicity of creation. Rajasic knowledge sees all things and creatures as separate and distinct. Tamasic knowledge, lacking any sense of perspective, sees one small part and mistakes it for the whole. Wow. This is one of my favorite passages in the Gita. I told you I love chapter 18. So the highest form of knowing, Sattvic knowing, recognizes, well, it's the ideal we've been preaching all along with this book, that to see the self in all creatures, to recognize everyone you meet is the presence of infinite divine significance, including the one looking back at you in the mirror. Try that one on. That's Sattvic knowledge, to recognize, can I use the God word here, to recognize God in all, as Jesus said, the way you treat the least of these, you are treating me. That's Sattvic. Rajasic knowledge just sees all the creatures as distinct and separate, kind of just a big crowd. And Tamasic is the worst. Tamasic sees one little slice and thinks everything is like that. That's called prejudice, bias, discrimination, or in a plain word, ignorance. Let's talk about, that was knowledge. Let's talk about work. Work performed to fulfill one's obligations without thought of personal reward or of whether the job is pleasant or unpleasant is Sattvic work. Work prompted by selfish desire or self-will, full of stress, is Rajasic work. Work that is undertaken blindly without any consideration of consequences, waste, injury to others, or one's own capacities is Tamasic. Yeah, I mean, the question just hanging in the room here is, which would you like to be? Which do you think would lead to the most joy, the most effectiveness? I think it's pretty obvious. Sattvic workers are free from egotism and selfish attachments, full of enthusiasm and fortitude in success and failure alike. Rajasic workers have strong personal desires and crave rewards for their actions. Covetous, impure, and destructive, they are easily swept away by fortune, good and bad. Tamasic workers are undisciplined, vulgar, stubborn, deceitful, dishonest, and lazy. They are easily depressed and prone to procrastination. I've been all three of these people, like in an hour. So if you recognize some of your own qualities in some of these descriptions, don't despair. And don't celebrate too much either. We're just doing some kind of deep, dissection of human consciousness. And it's a fascinating schema or map that Hinduism is providing for us, this business of the three gunas, which again are the three threads that come out of Prakriti, like spider web out of a spider, and make all of the forms in the world. A rock is very tamasic. Light is very sattvic. We are composite creatures of sattva, rajas, and tamas in varying proportions. And I think those proportions change as the hours of the day go by. There's a lot in movement right now as we're trying to understand this last beautiful chapter of the Gita. So let's talk about happiness now, and how that relates to this whole topic of sattva, rajas, and tamas. My neighbor gets a lot of enjoyment out of his motorcycle, clearly. So there's one kind of joy, right? That is fun, by the way, riding a bike. But now listen, Arjuna, there are also three kinds of happiness. By sustained effort, one comes to the end of sorrow. That which seems like poison at first, but tastes like nectar in the end. This is the joy of sattva, born of the mind at peace with itself. Can you think of an example of something that tastes like poison at first, but tastes like nectar at the end? I'm thinking of like going to college, right? Doing all this hard work. It's hard. It's like poison. But in the end, the soul reward of becoming more aware, becoming more global, becoming more humble, becoming more compassionate, becoming more fascinated with areas of knowledge you didn't even know about. Education can be enormously, sweetly, deliciously satisfying, even though it's a grind at first. Or what about physical exercise? That tastes like poison at first, but it ends up the endorphins and the endorphins and the serotonin and the health and the serenity and the lower anxiety and the lower resting heart rate and the strengthening of the immune system. These are sweetnesses that come after the bitterness and pain of exercise. Okay, so that's sattvic. Here's the second one. Pleasure from the senses seems like nectar at first, but it is bitter as poison in the end. This is the kind of happiness that comes to the rajasic. Yeah, too many tequila shots. Do I need to say more? Those who are tamasic draw their pleasures from sleep, indolence, and intoxication. Both in the beginning and in the end, this happiness is a delusion. So again, there's another window through which to reflect upon the relationship between sattva, rajas, and tamas. This is key though. No creature, whether born on earth or among the gods in heaven, is free from the conditioning of the three gunas. Everything that is, everything that takes form is impacted by these three vibrational energies, these three gunas. The different responsibilities found in the social order, distinguishing Brahman, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra, have their roots in this conditioning. Okay, so although before we sort of were throwing out the caste system and recognizing the infinite, transcendent, sacred significance of all creatures, no matter your caste or whether you have 2 legs or 4 or 8 or whatever, but here at the end, there's this affirmation that, you know, people are different. And they, by their own temperament, fall into certain categories or fall into certain, birds of a feather flock together kind of a thing. So there's that connection again to the caste system. Just a little bit more here. Dharma. That rich, rich idea all the way from chapter 2. It's been woven all through this. Again, Dharma meaning many things. The way the cosmos sustains itself, supports us. And my Dharma, my duty. to take what I have been given and give it back. Brahmanatman has never taken form in this precise way as Peter Boland, as insert your name here. You and I are a one-off. Never before in all of time has there been an entity, a creature exactly, precisely like you, nor will there ever be again. With your precise experiences and temperaments and passions and talents and skills and woundedness. And the way you see things, your perceptions, you are unique. And somehow Brahmanatman and Purusha and Prakriti took form as you, and because you are in the physical form, you are composed, like everything else, of the three gunas, and you are driven by your nature to take action, and yet you and I, buffeted by all of these forces within and without, must out of our free will still choose to do better, to become more conscious, to turn that dimmer switch toward the Sattvic range and out of the Tamasic and out of the Rajasic, where I think most people live. Ego, anxiety, fear, that's all Rajasic, right? We catch glimpses of the Sattvic sometimes, and we taste it and we want more. And a book like this is really a book about how to get more. But in verse 47 of chapter 18, Krishna says, it is better to perform one's own duties imperfectly than to master the duties of another. To be true to yourself, even if you don't pull it off perfectly, is a higher life than imitation of somebody else's dharma. That is none of your business to be doing and nailing it perfectly. I'll read that again. It is better to perform one's own duties imperfectly than to master the duties of another. By fulfilling the obligations he is born with, a person never comes to grief. And this line I have on my office door at school. No one should abandon duties because he sees defects in them. Every action, every activity is surrounded by defects as a fire is surrounded by smoke. This takes a big weight off my shoulders to know that I don't have to be perfect, because I never am. And that everything I do falls just a little short of whatever ideal I had in mind. And just to recognize that that's okay, that to not give up. Let me read it again. No one should abandon duties because he sees defects in them. Every action, every activity is surrounded by defects as a fire is surrounded by smoke. So what I take from that is that no matter whatever you try to accomplish in this world, in the political realm, in any sphere of creativity, of productivity, whatever you try to do, reform laws, create a more just society, cure a disease, you're always going to be plagued by errors, by unintended consequences, what Krishna calls defects. Things are going to go wrong. Every new solution creates two new problems. That's okay. Don't stop. Don't stop creatively looking for that next solution. That's such a liberating teaching that imperfection is inevitable. Keep working anyway. That every action is surrounded by defects. Every activity is surrounded by defects, as a fire is surrounded by smoke. So finally, Krishna says, if you egotistically say, I will not fight this battle, your resolve will be useless. Your own nature will drive you to it. Your own karma, born of your own nature, will drive you to do even that which you do not wish to do because of your delusion. And then he ends with this, I think, rather open-ended piece of advice for Arjuna. He says, I give you these precious words. This whole book, all 18 chapters of wisdom. He says, I give you these precious words of wisdom. Reflect on them and do as you choose. This is no Old Testament God, barking out orders, barking out commandments with threats of hellfire. This is a God personage who tries his best to put into words and concepts the ineffable, boundless wisdom that cannot be spoken, and shows Arjuna things that the gods don't even understand, and that we got to look over the shoulder and also see. And now you just go back to your life and do as you choose. These are the last words I shall speak to you, dear one, Krishna says. For your spiritual fulfillment, you are very dear to me. Be aware of me always. Adore me. Make every act an offering to me, and you shall come to me. This I promise, for you are dear to me. Abandon all supports and look to me for protection. I shall purify you from the sins of the past. I'm recording this video in the month of February, and this is the traditional time in Christianity of Lent. Ash Wednesday was a little while ago, and for Christians who participate in this, they're going through a 40-day period. That sounds a lot like that. To learn, to become more humble, to pray, to let go of attachments to the world, practice renunciation. Started with the ash on the forehead at Ash Wednesday, an ancient ritual in the Vedas and in Norse mythology and in the Hebrew traditions. Ashes, from ashes you come and to ashes you shall return. The fundamental impermanence of all form. And yet behind the veil of Maya, behind the coming and going, that deep, abiding, birthless and deathless self, the Atman that we all are, and that Krishna comes to kind of knock on our head and remind us that that's what we are. And he says in verse 67, one last thing. He says, do not share this wisdom with anyone who lacks in devotion or self-control, lacks the desire to learn, or scoffs at me. Those who teach this supreme mystery of the Gita to all who love me perform the greatest act of love. They will come to me without doubt. No one can render me more devoted service. No one on earth can be more dear to me. So, as we come to a close now of our study of the Bhagavad Gita, I encourage you, if you haven't already, to pick up this book, and with this primer behind you, these 5 videos behind you, you're all set. You're all set to get into this yourself and to read it over and over again with a pencil in hand, underline the good parts, and come back to these videos if there's a chapter that you'd like a little help with, and it's in one of these 5 videos here. So thanks so much for spending this time with us. See you in the next video.